Good morning. Today I have with me Ivan Bilan. Welcome to Managers Club. How are you?
Great, thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. Ivan and I were talking about how to measure an engineering manager, right? Like, how do you measure your success? How do you measure if you're doing a good job or if engineering managers that report to you are doing good? And this is a very exciting topic for me. It's not something we've covered before in Managers Club. And Ivan has done a lot of thinking about this. So we're going to jump right in. And I'll set this context up. I'm really interested in this topic. I'm going to challenge Ivan on some of these, be a little bit devil's advocate just to push the envelope on some of these questions, because I think some of you in the audience might be thinking, okay, how would this really work for me? So, with that, let's just jump right in. Ivan, give us a little context. Why is it important to track manager performance?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our main goal as engineering managers is to have a very effective and productive team and also a satisfied team of engineers. And there has a lot of research and sort of lots of content on how you can do that for your team, but there's very little content on how you can track yourself and track your own progress and your own yourself as well. And there's definitely you can reuse all of the metrics that are available to track the effectiveness of your team. That can be a subset of metrics that you can use to evaluate yourself, but there are some additional things that you can track and just make sure you're on the right track. And
I think that's great. You're right. There's a lot of metrics to measure the
yeah,
efficiency of engineering teams, the productivity of engineering teams. There's not a lot of frameworks to measure the effectiveness of a manager. And one of the challenges is that the impact of a manager can be very indirect and hard to
right.
notice, right? Engineering manager doesn't fix bugs themselves. They don't write lines of code and stuff. So why don't we jump in? You've looked at a bunch of metrics. What are some of the metrics that you think are good to use to measure an EM?
I think that the main foundational metric in my mind is the how satisfied your team is, right? So team satisfaction, how well are they growing? So this would all fall into a group of people leadership metrics. So this would be one group, for example. Then there are metrics you could put into a bucket of product quality and engineering excellence, right? So this again, a lot of overlap with space, for example. And then on top of that, what you want to track as well is the delivery overall, how well your teams are delivering, how well are your products doing, right? So you can throw in some business KPIs into this as well, try to track how well these features are doing and everything that you release, how well it is received by your customers, internal or external. For example, you can track how good you are as a hiring manager. So lots of metrics there you can deep dive into just to see how well can you build up your teams. And I think there's a group of metrics there that you can also track because I think it's important that your team is recognizable throughout the company that you're in, that you as an engineering manager are also recognizable. And you've talked about some of the reasons for that, and there are quite a few. So that's very important as well.
Okay, why don't we stop there? We're going to dig into some of these and maybe we'll get a little more detail on them. So, I think the first one you mentioned is people management. Okay. Some of the best leaders are very people centric. Okay. And
Yeah.
so let's talk about people management. How do you measure people management?
Yeah, people management or people leadership, we can call it that as well. There are some, again, foundational things. You can just track like a satisfaction score or engagement score of your team. So this is very typical. It's not peculiar to engineering management. I think almost every manager does it, regardless if they're engineering manager or not. You can track that by lots of companies have satisfaction surveys that they run, like a pulse check every quarter or half a year. I think this is a really a foundational metric. And why it is, I recently saw like a study that was published about how do we as managers actually affect like mental health of people we work with and especially our direct reports. And I think the statistic was like that managers have impact on people's mental health just as much as their spouse because we spend just so much time at
Sure.
work and with our colleagues.
I want to go back to this
Oh yeah,
people
go
management
ahead,
thing, okay,
sure.
that you talked about. So, yes, a lot of companies do these surveys, right? They do these
Right.
employee engagement surveys and they ask people how happy they are. And sure, obviously, we would want all things being equal for everyone to be very happy and very
Oh yeah.
engaged. We care about the people. But let me challenge you a little bit on that. Some people say it's not the engineering manager's job to make everybody happy. The
Oh
manager's
yeah.
job is to get stuff done. And there are some engineering leaders that are very famous in the
Mm, mm.
news. People aren't very happy, but these companies get a hell of a lot done. So, what is your thought on that? Like, really, how important is it for the people to be like this?
Yeah, I think you can combine both. And if you have both a satisfied team that's also at the same time challenged equally, then you can produce more. There's actually like a psychological, not a hypothesis, it's called a law. It's Yerkes-Dodson law. It says that if you keep your team sort of sufficiently challenged and stressed, but to a certain level that they are not overstressed or brought over the line, then they're the most performative at that stage, right? So you want to really find a balance between being challenging, being hard on delivery, on quality, but at the same time driving fulfillment of people you work with. And if you push people over the limit now, that probably will come back to you in terms of turnover, right? So you will lose people more often, and turnover for engineering teams is tough as well because it's knowledge being lost, being transferred. It's a lot of overhead. So I think in the most ideal sort of setup, you find that balance, you challenge people, but you also make them like feel fulfilled to an extent. You don't have to make everyone happy. You don't have to make everyone satisfied, and you don't have to do that. There's an additional metric we can talk about related to this, and it's related to turnover. Right? There's some managers call regrettable turnover and unregrettable turnover, where you say you have some people leaving that you like either
Yeah,
it's
I get it.
unexpected
That
or
you
you.
didn't, yeah, you didn't want them to leave.
Yeah,
So wait,
exactly.
so are you saying then that you want to keep them happy enough that they don't quit? But that's the bar? Is that what we're saying? Keep them happy, but
No,
just
no,
happy enough that
that's
they don't quit.
no. What I'm saying is, if you push them over the line, then that's the consequence.
For sure, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Okay, okay. What was the next one you were going to talk about? I think you were talking about growth of your team. I think
Oh,
that was one that you
yes.
mentioned, right?
Yeah,
Getting
exactly.
people promoted, developing them. Let's talk about that. How do you measure that? And why is
Yeah,
this metric important?
good. I think it's important because again, to have an effective team, you want them to be sufficiently challenged, and that challenge comes by trying to get them to the next level. When we talk with our directs, one of the tools that we can use is gap analysis, where you can say, for example, you're a senior engineer now, but here's what are the expectations for staff level, and let's talk about the gap between that, and let's get you to the next level. And you can measure basically like a promotion rate or promotion success rate of your engineers.
I really like this one. I'm not going to challenge you on this one because I think if you're an engineering manager and a lot of people on your team are being promoted and developing, that's awesome. And that reflects well on you. And to your point, yeah, people will want to join your team because they'll be like, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity here. So I think that, I don't know if people put enough emphasis on that metric, to be honest. I really like that one a lot. Um, let's talk another metric. I think you talked something about like delivery. You mentioned delivery, right? So let's talk about delivery. Certainly, team delivers a lot, does a lot. That's great. Okay, but how much of that is like the engineering manager, and how much of that is the responsibility, say, of the engineers, right? And the tech leads and all that, because it's who gets the credit for that. And so let's talk about that in realm of
Yeah,
managing engineering manager performance.
that's true. You like ideally everyone on the team owns this, but as an engineering managers, I think our primary task here is to create a predictability, right? So we want to make sure predictability rate over quarter over year stays stable in the same. You can use, let's say, pick an example. So I'm talking about predictability. One good way to track this would be start from the basics, maybe some inspiration from Dora metrics. For example, ticket cycle time is a metric you can track over time. So mean ticket cycle time, it means how much time does it take from engineer picking up the ticket and it actually hitting production. This is a metric you can track, and this is a good metric to track on team level as well, and just to see that it stays relatively predictable over time. Because if it doesn't, that means
I get it. So I agree with you. I think that predictability is very important, right? Like when people look at a manager or a team, they want to have trust that if they
yeah,
say they're going to do something, it's going to get done. But let me push back a little bit. So let's explore
sure.
this topic. Okay. So I worked at a company. I'm not going to say what company it was. And predictability was very highly valued. And if you ever were late, you got in big trouble.
Yeah.
So there was a negative side to that. People would sandbag a lot, right?
Mm,
Undercommit to things. They would go very slowly because
mm,
that's one way to be very predictable, right? If I give lots of extra time, if I undercommit to things, then the confidence interval of being on time is
mm,
very high. These teams were slow. So how do you balance that? Because you want to push them, but you also want to be
mm.
predictable.
Yeah, good. I think it starts then on team leadership level. We, as engineering managers, we also closely work with product managers, with our lead engineers, staff engineers. I think it's great to then on that level think about defining some reachable goals, but that are still attainable and challenging for the team. Discuss these goals with the team and then just make sure that everyone's on board with this. So, yeah, you definitely can send back, but it's your responsibility to deliver on time, but also deliver often and also meet business KPIs. You can't just track one thing like predictability rate without it being tied to company goals, to goals that you set for the team as well.
Okay. Um, could we talk maybe a little bit more predictability? What do you do? Like, how do you work with like your tech leads, your scrum masters, your product managers? What is your approach or what do you do there? Are there any tips to improve predictability of the outcomes?
Yeah, I think let's just take an example of using story points. I think it's important there. There is a team understanding and agreement what story points are and how what does it mean to assign, I don't know, 5 or 8 story points to a ticket. So what does it mean in terms of complexity and delivery, so that it's important that everyone is on board. Then you take those metrics, track them over time, again coming back to this variance that you track, how often does it deviate. And then in addition to that, you did mention sort of, yeah, under promising or sandbagging. What I think is important here not to do that is also to make sure to group types of work that team is doing and to make sure each of those gets assigned adequate amount of time. So what I'm talking here about is feature work, maintenance work, fixing bugs coming in from customers. There needs to be a framework around this as well, that you make sure you perpetually work on that you perpetually deliver features, and that you also improve the understanding from your customers and from success teams how to work with your software, how to correctly report bugs so that it saves everyone time, and then you can actually, yeah, you can predictably work with those different streams of work.
Okay. Okay. Let's move on. I think you also talked about hiring, right? Like a good
Right.
engineering manager would be measured by the effectiveness of hiring. So let's talk about that. Say a little bit more about how you would measure a good
Yeah.
engineering manager with regards to hiring.
Yeah, that's a good one. And again, it really depends on the org and how the organization does hiring. And in today's time, if you're even hiring at all, which is the situation we're in. But let's say you
Let's
have
say
the budget.
normal times, when
Say,
people are actually
yeah,
hiring.
let's say you have the budget, you can hire, right? I think the interview process starts and one submits a CV. And so in the orgs that I work, there is like an HR or talent acquisition manager assigned to you that's working with you. They are usually the first line to screen CVs, to maybe have a first call. There, I think some I think it's important to really closely work with them and really make sure they understand what you are looking for, they understand the role, and they understand the requirements overall. As an example, in this group, a metric you could track is what is your conversion rate from like a HR person talking to the candidate, then you talking to the candidate. Do you usually align? Do you usually give like a yes to the same candidate? They come from your like talent acquisition manager, because if that doesn't happen, if that conversion rate is low, that means you haven't really spent enough time working with your like talent acquisition manager and really making sure everyone's on the same page. What is the role we're looking for? So that's just one metric. Then the metric you can track as well is how well does your interview that you do, like we usually do, like after the HR person talking to the candidate, you would have a call with them as an engineering manager. You can then track what is the success rate after that. So how effective was your interview in identifying that it's a good fit? And when they go, for example, do some coding challenge or architectural design case or whatever your company does, just to see how well they do there and make sure that conversion rate is high as well, so that you don't spend too much time of, say, your engineers on interviewing the candidates that don't fit. So you need to optimize on that level as well.
Okay, let's
Yeah,
talk about
sure.
those are very interesting. So I like this first metric. I haven't worked anywhere where they tracked it, but I agree with you that if the recruiter is sending you candidates that are total miss, that's not good. It could be you have a bad recruiter. It could be, like you say, the engineering manager hasn't done a good job in explaining what the requirements are. So I like that, right? Assuming the engineering manager needs to really help the recruiter find the right people. That actually seems really good. Let me ask you about this manager. Normally, when I'm doing hiring manager calls, I'm not asking people coding questions. Okay. I'm asking
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
behavioral questions, motivation, all these kind of things. And so they might have all the great reasons for joining the company. Then they go to the coding interview and they
Oh, yeah.
bomb it.
Yeah.
So, how do you, as an engineering manager in that interview, you say you want to, yeah, I agree. It'd be a waste of
Mhm.
time. You send them on and they fail the coding. But how do you know you're not asking them coding
Yeah.
questions? So, how do you affect this?
Yeah, that's a good one. I personally, and I think it's important. Maybe you will never find time to really go through like some coding case or something like that in those interviews, right? You focus more on culture fit, on like soft skills. But I think it's possible to ask some like shorter architectural design questions, or just to talk more about engineering excellence. How do they approach that topic? Are they aware of things like what's an SLO? How do you do proper incident management? How do you handle an outage? So this these are often really good indicators of, in the end, also good coding skills. And like from my experience, this really helps then as well to evaluate to some extent in your call. In addition to soft skills and culture fit, that's very important as well. Just try to add on some of those questions, and this has helped my conversion rates improve a bit, at least just on the time I tracked it. It definitely helped.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so you ask them some kind of architectural question, some kind of
Yeah, something small they can
engineering
answer
excellence.
in a few sentences. Yeah.
Okay, I like that. I like that. On the topic of engineering excellence, what would be the metrics you would look for that would reflect that you have a good engineering manager versus a bad one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, engineering excellence, I think, again, we can draw a lot from existing frameworks. I think the Dora metrics is a good one, where you can track things like what's your uptime, what's your time to recovery, how long does it take you to How much time do you spend on outages? How many outages do you have in the first place over time? So you can track all that. I personally think, strong culture of SLOs, service level objectives. If you have a strong culture of having good SLO coverage, if you have a strong SLO error budget policy on top of it, this really helps with engineering excellence because you usually catch problems with an SLO breach where instead of an actual outage for the customer. So SLOs, usually if you breach SLOs, that means there's some disruption to the service, but it's not completely down or just some component is not working. So you catch those problems over time, and this is how you can prevent like the excellence of a project or like engineering project slipping. Then there are some more typical things you can also track, like what's the test coverage, although it's also a tricky metric. How, let's say, how often do you deploy? This is also coming from DORA metrics. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that because
Yeah, sure.
the engineering manager doesn't operate completely in a vacuum, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a tech lead, there's probably senior engineers, other people on the team that have a lot of impact in what's the test coverage, what's the architecture
Mm-hmm.
reliability. So how do you as an engineering manager like work with them to like improve these things, right? On the one hand, but then also how do you balance not going too far so that
Oh,
people
yeah.
want to have 100% of all these things, but then nothing gets delivered? So how do you work with them on this?
Yeah, let's see. So I think first, you did mention like tech leads on the team. I think first it's important to align that with your product manager, right? So that you're both on the same page, that the product manager knows that the team will commit some time to say technical debt or just improving the product to test coverage. And it's important to deliver that message to them and then explain that if there's no time for this, everything else will be slower.
I think that's great. That's actually a really, really good point, right? If you don't do this, eventually the velocity is going to go down,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. So it's, and I think as engineering managers, like it's very important to work well with your product managers. Then when it comes to senior engineers, lead engineers, as you mentioned, it's I often bring it up in our one-on-ones, like just a check-in on what is the current status of the service. And I also encourage the team to, again, have a strong focus on like SLOs. I think that's a good indicator of you not over engineering things. So if your SLOs don't get breached too often, that means the service is working well. That means you don't have to spend now a lot of time on technical debt, maybe just like a regular amount.
So we've talked a lot about
Sure.
metrics, right?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And it's the metrics are good. It'd be great if we had a very objective way to measure an engineering manager or an engineer or anyone, right? Something very objective. You say, okay, this is clearly A plus engineering manager or a failing engineering manager. But a lot of engineering managers' job, in my experience, is very subjective. A lot of
Yeah.
subjective interpretation of what's going on. There's also politics and other things like that. So, to what extent, or talk to me about that, is that really important or relative to all these metrics?
Yeah, look, I think it's really important to understand that this shouldn't be like your vanity metrics where you just look at them and say, "Oh, I'm such a great engineering manager." You should look at those metrics and evaluate them and use them as, again, as a tool to support your decision making, to support improving team processes, and just to really help you understand how well is the team doing as well, right? And you as their proxy as engineering manager. So it is a tool in the end, right? Yeah, so in ideal world, you track these metrics for yourself, but of course you can also use them to to talk to your manager, right? You can set goals based on these metrics. And then I think these metrics is really should be used as a pool of things that you can take to create goals for yourself based on the context you are in, based on the team org you're in, based on company goals, right?
Ivan, what are some What are some like important takeaways you might have for people? Or maybe one of the one, two, three most important things you think of all these that they should focus on?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we're talking about this metrics you can use to evaluate how well you and your team is doing. I think what I often see and what often happens is we spend most of our time like setting goals for individuals on the team, spending a lot of time on that, but we don't think about the big picture of the team itself. And I think by having these goals, by having these metrics, again, it can be used as a very effective tool to support your decision making. So you can use them specifically to see the big picture itself. How is the team doing in all of these areas? Any of these areas need significant intervention from you as engineering manager? Basically, how much time do you need to spend on each of those? So it will help you see what streams of work you should prioritize more, I would say.
I see. So you look at these metrics and see like a guide to what areas to focus on. This would be like
Yeah, exactly.
one of
Because
the
I can tell you one thing: as an engineering managers, we have little time,
yes.
and it's important to prioritize our time as well. And I think just by seeing, okay, I don't know, we are low on product quality or delivery is not stable. Okay, that means I need to spend more time on this and make sure this is back on track.
I want to ask you now about stakeholders. As an engineering manager, it's very important to have your stakeholders happy and aligned with you. So, how do you, as an EM, kind of measure that, keep that on track? What advice do you have on stakeholder management?
Yeah, sure. I think the first and most important thing would be that you know your stakeholders, that you did some research, you there are some frameworks out there that you help you create a stakeholder matrix where you can basically prioritize your stakeholders. And there's
Oh,
like a
I'm
yeah,
not
there's
familiar with
a
these. There's a framework for prioritizing stakeholders. Oh,
yes, there is.
oh, that's cool.
So it's basically stakeholder matrix would help you understand how how much of an influence those stakeholder have on your team, and how interested those stakeholders are in things that you're delivering or releasing. And this, if you use the stakeholder matrix, the upper right quadrant is where you identify your key players, so to say. So these are the main stakeholders who you often talk to, who are often tracking the progress of your teams, who are often tracking how your features are being delivered. Yeah, so if you do that, it's good to have that mapped out so that you know what your stakeholders are. And then you can go a level beyond that and try and track how satisfied those stakeholders are as well. So there, or you can even
How do you
so
know? How do you know how satisfied they are?
yeah, so it depends who are your stakeholders. In some cases, it's probably easy to track if you're like a platform team. Your stakeholders are internal engineering teams who are adopting your like a microservice or service that you're putting out. So you could just run a like a survey, internal NPS survey that could help you. When it comes to um, other stakeholders. So let's just go with the example of inside the company. You have other managers, you have managers on different level that that have some certain expectations from you as well. There's an interesting concept here that we can use is we can check how many of those stakeholders are supportive versus resistant. So supportive stakeholders would be the ones that like overall are very receptive to your proposals. That means if you're, I don't know, creating some, I don't know, business case or proposal for a new project or new feature, and you have more supportive stakeholders than resistant stakeholders. So resistant stakeholders would be those who didn't like your proposal or were not satisfied with it. And you can use this to also evaluate how well you are doing as a leader of the team. If you are putting out good quality proposals, if you're really considering the structure there, if you're really considering all the points like coming in from the outside and Um, yeah, this can help you then understand if you're managing your stakeholders well, basically.
I think that's very fascinating. So what you're saying is you have the stakeholders, like the other managers and leaders in the company, and you put them like in two
Yeah.
buckets, right? Like the ratio, the ones that are basically you're saying that are receptive or predisposed to any proposal you make, and then the ones that are skeptical, are resistant to any future proposal you make. So they're really resistance of you, the manager, right? And you want to have so you measure this ratio. So it's really interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and basically it tells you every time you put out something new, that means more time needs to be spent on convincing those like resistant stakeholders, right? You talk to them more, you get more of their opinion, whereas you know that the supportive stakeholders usually, let's say, most of the time would agree with your proposals, then you don't have to spend as much of your time on basically talking to them or involving them too much in what you're putting out.
That's really a great point. That's really a great point. You also mentioned self promotion. Yeah, we recently had an episode here on Manager Help about self promotion. Now, self promotion is very important, clearly, but how is it important with regards to to evaluating the performance of an engineering manager?
Yeah, it so self promotion is an interesting topic, right? And then again, just word of warning, we're coming a bit into this like vanity metrics. We need to be very careful with that we just don't track metrics just to show how good we are. I think these, let's call them self promotion metrics, I think they are important. And let me give you an example what I'm talking about. We can track this on team level, and we can just say how recognizable is your team in the org that you are, right? And this can be done through various ways, and it can also be translated into metrics. So let's say, how many department knowledge sharing sessions does your team present or run? How many RFCs or like architectural design docs are authored by engineers from your team? I don't know. How many workshops does your team run? How many project proposals do you put out? How many, let's say, best practices that your team have end up being adopted by other teams as well? So these are all fall into this like self promotion bucket. And then you can also track it on just on the level of engineering manager yourself. You can also put out like thought leadership content out there, right? So you, as an engineering manager, you can create some playbooks that other engineering managers can adopt. You can write blog posts about best practices in your team. You can run internal meetups, run knowledge sharing sessions. So there are many things you can do that will help both you and your team be recognizable. And as we were talking about this before, I think it's important because then if you need more resources or if you're working on a like super complex project, then it's easier to get buy-in or easier to like to, what's the right word here, easier to attract internal talent as well to join your team if there's like internal mobility. If especially if the company has a good for internal mobility, then it's easier to attract engineers. Like, I would say engineers would like to join your team because they see how many things you put out there for other teams, knowledge sharing sessions,
Ah,
RFCs, workshops, and so on.
I see. So it help. Yes, if there's a lot of internal mobility, then you're saying it would help get other people to join your team because they're putting out a lot of stuff. Okay, got it. It's good. Ivan, you've been really generous with your time today. If people wanted to reach out to you, get to know you, speak with you, what would be the best way to get in touch with you?
Sure, first would be LinkedIn itself, so you can find me there. Another place where you can find some resources also related to this would be my GitHub account. So just to search my name and GitHub, I have some awesome list-like repositories there. There are some on engineering management, some on AI, on microservices. So you might find some helpful resources there as well.
Oh, that's great. I'll put a link to those in the notes and I'll check those out. Ivan, again, thank you so much for being on the show. It's great to have you here. It's a very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Talk with you
Thank you
soon.
for inviting me. This was awesome. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.